Hello everyone. It's me, Chaff Commander Coffee. It's been a while since I did a video specifically for YouTube, but I felt it was appropriate given, given that we are finished with the Humankind opendev, and I played a hell of a lot of it, and there'll be a couple of videos about it. Well, there'll be my general thoughts along with probably just some things to keep in mind before the full release of the game. When the game fully releases, I'll probably be doing some more YouTube videos about like a tutorial series on like how to play the game, where the buttons are. I know some people are a bit confused with that, and generally just how to do well, how to do the game right. Because I played a lot of it and I really enjoyed it. Just to preface that, I mean, as I said, I'll do another video on my general thoughts for Humankind. But today I wanted to do something since I played nearly all of the cultures, nearly all of them. But given it was a scenario, there were certain things that I could test and certain things I couldn't test with the limited time that I had. But I believe, unless someone wants to prove me wrong, that I scored the highest fame score of anyone. I posted the screenshot on the Reddit. I'll be using it as the background for one of my talks about humankind in general, so you can see that. The high score was 19,977, and it could have been a little bit higher as well if I'd have redone it. So there's room for improvement, but I think I probably managed that. And this was all on the highest difficulty with the AI, so there's no multiplayer yet. So I think it's pretty reasonable for me to say that I kind of know what I'm doing with the game, so I can make a tier list of the civilizations or cultures with some certainty. So that's what we'll be doing today. Now I can't. The industrial era civilizations are on here, but I didn't play them. There was no way to play them in the open dev, so I can't really comment on them. I'm going to be focusing on the ancient through to early modern, since those were the cultures available, and just with my impressions of how they played and how they all sort of add up. Okay, so let's start with the ancient era. Unfortunately, the tier list is kind of, they've got everything a bit jumbled, but it's in alphabetical order for the most part, so I'll be able to find the civs that I'm looking for. Yeah, that's that. Let me see. So we're going to start off with the Assyrians. The Assyrians here, and I'm going to be putting the Assyrians in. Oh, it's hard to say whether they're C or actually D tier, but I kind of want to put one culture from each era at the top and one at the bottom. And if I had to pick, Assyrians would be the bottom tier civ for the ancient era. The Assyrians are an expansion civ. Now, the expansionist ability is actually really good, and the abilities do matter. What your culture does do matter depending on what era you're in. For example, if you're very late in the game, the expansionist ability kind of becomes a bit irrelevant because it gives you the ability to capture outposts without going to war with someone or ransacking them. You just put a stack of units on top of the outpost. You choose to claim it. It costs a bit of gold, but it allows you to use gold early on in the game to capture outposts instead of using influence to build them. So it does have that additional effect. It does generate a grievance, which is used to go to war, but you get an outpost for it, so it's kind of what you would be going to war for anyway. And if you can avoid the war and pinch a couple outposts off your neighbors, then it's totally worth it. So with the Assyrians, why do I think their bottom tier of the expansionist ability is pretty good? Well, to put it lightly, the Assyrians have a couple of issues. Firstly, we will talk about their civilization bonus. We'll start with civilization bonus. It's actually quite good. It's 1 plus land movement speed on units. So every stack of units gets 1 additional move. That's really useful for scouting early on in the game. It's useful for maneuvering your armies around. And especially if your army is zone of control blocked by another army, normally you can only make 1 move. But with the Assyrians, you can make 2 moves. You can move once, and then the extra additional movement you have allows you to move again. So you can move out of zone of control, which costs 4, and then the Assyrians +1 allows you to move again. So it's useful for maneuvering around other people's armies, getting in better positions, just getting around the map faster, which is good. But it's not an economic bonus, and it doesn't inherently make your army stronger. It's just useful. On top of that, the Assyrians, the Emblematic Quarter, I just call them like unique district or unique building. It's basically what I refer to them as. Is the Danu, which is a unique fortification district. Now, the problem I have with the unique fortification districts is that the garrison districts can normally be built on any tile. They don't have to be attached to a district coming out from the city center. But the unique districts that are garrisons do have to be built adjacent to another district. And I think this removes loads of potential from them because they have a higher fortification value than standard garrisons, at least for the most part. The Danu is basically, it's kind of worse than the Mycenians one. It gives less fortification. I assume it's a bit cheaper to build, but I didn't look into it that much. I found I never built the unique fortification districts because I could put it in terms like this, I could spend 8 turns building a unique fortification district and using up one of the tiles that my population is working on or exploiting with the district. Or I could build 2 units, which are arguably useful for expansion, which is what the Assyrians want to be doing, fighting wars or defending my cities. Like, units can be used in all circumstances. The fortification can only be used on defense if you're being assaulted, because you could always just get sieged out, in which case then it's kind of useless. So, yeah, Emblematic District is they might as well just not have one. On top of that, garrisons normally provide stability, but the emblematic districts that are garrison replacements but have to be built attached to a city center, they actually reduce stability. So it is literally a net loss, in my opinion, to build the Assyrians' emblematic quarter. This applies to a couple other civilizations as well, but some of them get less of a harsh payoff for it. But the Assyrians, they literally get nothing for building. They literally make their city worse by building one of these districts, in my opinion. So do keep in mind, this entire tier list is my opinion based on my experiences playing it, but I never found a reason to build Assyria's emblematic district. So there you go. Their unit is the Assyrian Raider, which they are a higher than... so normally you get Scout Cavalry in the Ancient Era, which is 16 strength. The Assyrian Raiders are 21 strength, which is pretty good for a cavalry unit, and you get them really early on with Domestication, which is one of the first techs you get in the Ancient Era. So you can get them out really quickly, which is good. However, I will also preface this by saying I played it on the highest difficulty, so some of my tier list is based on that information. Spearmen come out relatively fast, and spearmen will 1-for-1 beat Assyrian Raiders. They're good for killing scouts, and they're good for killing warriors and archers, but once spearmen start coming out, and they do come out relatively quickly, the Assyrian Raiders will fall off to basically being glorified scouts. They can still, be used in an army to try to pick off archers and stuff, but as soon as the spearman turns around to fight them, they'll just get destroyed. So, yep. The special ability of them, besides that, is they generate additional gold when destroying an outpost. Now, the expansion ability allows you to claim an outpost with gold by putting units on it. The Assyrian Raider gets more gold by destroying an outpost, which is just counterproductive to being an expansion civ. Now, obviously, you might make the argument that, oh, but I could destroy one outpost to generate the gold to claim another one. Yes, you can do that. Or I could just claim them both, because the cost for using the expansionist ability is quite low early on in the game when you don't have many outposts. So, and generally speaking, a lot of people made this comment that in the opendev, the VictorOpendev, ransacking took too many turns. It took 7 turns, and it was only 150 turns on the scenario that we were allowed to play. So 7 turns is a long, long time. And honestly, I do agree. I think 7 turns is way too long to be ransacking something. And so you found, and it only takes 5 turns to capture something using the expansionist ability. So it takes longer to ransack it than it does to just straight up capture it. So I think what the Assyrians need to be changed is they need as with most other civilizations, their ability, the civ ability of 1+ land movement is fine. That doesn't need to be changed. That's okay. But the Emblematic Quarter, the Danu, needs to be able to be built on any tile, like any other garrison, and it should provide stability. It shouldn't take away stability. If they made that change, the Danu would actually be like, oh, sweet, I can build a garrison which I can pop units out of anywhere in my lands before I have bronze working. Now, I don't need to tech bronze working as the Assyrians because I get the Assyrian Raiders, which don't need bronze working, they just need domestication. And if I get carpentry, I get archers, and now I have a perfectly serviceable army, right? Without bronze working. So I don't need to worry about building garrisons. I just get better garrisons. And that might actually have some use, but honestly, that's a side thing. The Assyrian Raiders themselves, their unique unit, really ought to be changed. It should, as a unit, they're fine. Like combat stat wise, they're fine. But their unique ability of getting extra gold when destroying an outpost, they should change that. The Assyrians are all about they're called the siege masters, right? They're called siege masters, and nothing about their civilization has anything to do with siege. I would probably make it so the Assyrian Raiders are I'd make them a cavalry unit, because since the Victor update, cavalry can no longer cross fortifications unless they're destroyed. I would make it so Assyrian Raiders can just do that. Assyrian Raiders are the only unit, or cavalry unit, which can cross fortifications. Because they're siege masters, right? That's the whole point of the Assyrians. They're supposed to be able to be siege masters. So that's the change I would make. I don't know how balanced that would be, but currently their emblematic quarter is useless. Their emblematic unit is a decent cavalry unit in the ancient era, but has a pretty worthless ability, and their actual trait is kind of a bit hit or miss. So that's the Assyrians. I'm going to put them in at the lowest ranking for the Humankind ancient era cultures. The next ancient era culture on the list here is the Babylonians. Babylonians, which some people are going to be thinking, oh yeah, Science Civ is really good, right? Yeah, no, Babylonians are a solid C tier, right? So if we're leaving one slot for the worst Civ in every era, I'm going to leave the S slot for the best Civ in each era, in my opinion. And then the rest are just based on how relevant they are. A being, this is always a good pick. B being, this is normally a good pick if you can't get one of the other ones. And C tier being it's not the worst, but it's not great. So let's talk about the Babylonians. They are a science culture, which gives them access to the... I'll talk about these civilization abilities a bit in more detail in another video, but science cultures are able to research technologies from the next era, so they're not locked into one era's worth of tech, but they can also set their cities on science mode, which eats up all their industry and money and converts straight into science. Now, industry and money is a lot easier to get or especially industry, in the ancient era than it is to get science, because you don't have access to science quarters. So it's a bit difficult, and also the infrastructure that boosts science, that doesn't come till quite late on in the era. So the Babylonians could, in theory, jump into science mode very early on to get all of the ancient era tech very quickly, which is cool, I guess. But let's talk about their actual traits. So the Babylonians' first trait is Philosophers of the Wilds. This is their civilization bonus. They get +2 science per research technology on the capital. Okay, so generally speaking, there's about 9, 10 technologies per era. The Babylonians get +2 science on the capital per tech. For every 3 techs you research, you get +6 science, which is the same amount of science one population would produce in the researcher role. This is relevant in the ancient era, and after that it's completely irrelevant because the techs obviously scale up in cost exponentially. The +2 science per research tech is useful for about the first 6 techs in the ancient era, and after that you could basically ignore it. Because yeah, it's a couple of free population on science in your capital, but that's literally it. It's if you're talking about it in terms of raw population bonuses, you do get a 1, 2, 3 population bonus every era in your capital dedicated to science, but that is a marginal bonus compared to some of the other civilization bonuses. So Babylon's not really winning any prizes there. The Emblematic Quarter, I thought this was a lot worse than it was. It's actually not bad. It's the astronomy house. You get to build it immediately, so you don't need any tech to unlock it. It's basically an early science quarter, but it has the added benefit of being able to provide food. So it gives 1 food per researcher on the city and 1 science per researcher. And it also produces an additional 1 food and 3 science for every adjacent farmer's quarter. So you want to go very heavy on food and science as Babylonians. That's kind of their deal. And it also means you don't need farmers, you don't need a population working the farmer job. Population can simply be working as scientists, and they will produce some food to upkeep themselves. It also gives a researcher slot, so the Babylonians in general have more researcher slots than other people in the ancient era. They can get tech done faster. Now, how relevant is it to get all that tech done? Well, you can get access to the to the classical era technology now this was just a feature of VictorOpendev. I don't know if that's going to be set in stone. That's what science civs do, possibly. But being able to research text from the next era is all well and good. But how relevant is it to do that? Well, generally speaking, you can rush the fortifications technology, which then changes your levy to be citizens, and then no one can really attack you. They can siege your city. There's nothing stopping them from doing that, but it does make it a bit more of a pain to attack your civ. I suppose. Yeah, the thing is like, if you research the next era's tech, do you have the infrastructure, the industry, the economy to actually make use of that technology that you've researched? Not necessarily. And honestly, the earlier on in the game, the less infrastructure and built up your civilization is, which makes it harder to utilize that advanced technology that you're getting. So yes, you might be technologically ahead, but you have no means by which to employ that technology, right? You don't have many provinces, so you don't have as many resources. You don't have as much industry to build new buildings. You don't have as much gold to get to like fast build new quarters and stuff. Your population is still low, so or relatively speaking, it's still low. So I don't think the focus on research is as useful in the ancient era, but it could be worse. The emblematic unit is the Sabu Sakasti, which I'm probably saying completely wrong because it has a ton of accented letters. So probably saying that completely wrong, but there you go. I don't speak Babylonian. They are a spearman unit, so they're available at bronze working. They do have higher combat strength than standard spearmen. I think they're about 22 compared to spearmen's 20. And they have the Guardian ability, which means they get an extra 3 strength when they're standing on a friendly district. So they're basically like 25 strength units, which puts them on the same sort of level as like classical era swordsmen. So they're very strong units when fighting on your own districts, which means you're under siege, generally speaking. Or they could be protecting a garrison out, because bronze working, you need bronze working to get them, so you can build garrisons. They could be protecting a garrison out in your borders, like on a hot like a mountain pass where there's only like one tile you can pass through. So they could be doing something like that. They are pretty good units, but specifically they're only stronger when standing on a friendly district. So if you use them in a siege to attack your enemies, they don't get the bonus when they're on enemy districts, only on their own districts. So I would say they're a solid defensive unit, but that is basically their purpose. They are only for defense. They're not flexible. They're still better than standard spearmen, right? So you could do worse than having them, but they're not like, that's their benefit, is defense, and that is their only purpose, or primary purpose. Their other purpose is just being a standard spearman unit, which is not really that exciting. So that's where I'm going to put the Babylonians. I'm going to put them in C tier. I think ancient era science civs just don't have the infrastructure really to make the best use of being able to research ahead of time, and that much research early on in the game is, at that stage of the game, you're more worried about getting your infrastructure, your industry, and your population growing. That's much more important than making sure your science is high. And sure, you don't want to fall behind on science, but if you're increasing your population and increasing your infrastructure and your industry, then you'll be able to put people on science, which, as I said, the Babylonians' ability, you need to research 3 techs to get 1 effective free population doing science. So, or I could play a civ that's going to purposefully grow my city and industry and such. Not that you can't do these things with the Babylonians, but it's just like, yeah, where their strength lies is, unfortunately, it's positioned very awkwardly at that stage of the game. So that's why I'm going to put them in C tier. Next, we have the Egyptians, which are here. And the Egyptians, oh, this is a hard decision. I think I would put the Egyptians. I don't want to stack one tier too highly, so I'm just taking a look at all the other civs, and I think I want to put the Egyptians in A tier. The Egyptians are a builder civilization, so they can set their cities to industry mode, which uses up their science and money, and it converts it into industry, so it allows you to build things faster. Very useful when building wonders. Not so, you don't really want to be using it when because you can't turn it off for 5 turns, so if you want to rush out a wonder without sacrificing population, which is something you can do with masonry, which is an early game technology. If you're building like your initial holy site, you can get that done really quickly, and the faster you get out, the faster you get more influence and faith. You can build again, as I said, an ancient era wonder quite quickly with the Egyptians. It's all very relevant. And builder civilizations, again, subject to change. It's a VictorOpendev. Whenever they finish a district or a construction, they get a temporary boost of stability. Now, districts normally reduce stability, which is kind of like public order. For those of you that haven't played Humankind, if it drops below like 30%, you can have revolts, and then rebel units will spawn and attack your. They'll start ransacking your stuff or just attack the city. They're not that hard to deal with, but like it's kind of annoying. So, and also your civics, which are like policies out of like Civ 6, I guess. Your civics take longer to unlock if you have low stability, so it's quite good to keep your stability high. Builder civilizations get more stability when they finish districts, so they can, as long as they keep building, they will never run out of stability. And when they stop building, then your stability is going to crash. But that's the trade-off, I guess. Just need some tea. Give me one moment. Oh, that's better. Alright. Ability of the Egyptians, Grand Planners. +1 industry on districts producing industry. Which, +1 industry on a district is It's really unexciting. You'd have to build 6 of those districts to effectively produce 1 extra population. However, the second ability is modify district production cost by 10%. Now, just like science, districts get exponentially more expensive as you go through the eras, and you also build more of them. As you build more districts, districts get pricier, so having a 10% cost reduction on them, it will save you so many turns. Especially as you get later into the game, it will save you a hell of a lot of turns on building new districts, which is useful because it's basically an ability that's always useful. So an ability that's always useful is good in my books. The Emblematic Quarter to know if one of the best wonders in the game is the Pyramids of Giza. If you build the Pyramids of Giza, you get 25% off construction costs for districts or industry costs for districts. That does stack with the Egyptians, so you get 35% off, which is a massive deal. Getting a third off all of your construction costs for districts. You're going to be building a lot of districts, so if you can get pyramids, great. Speaking of pyramids, the emblematic quarter for the Egyptians is the Egyptian pyramid. It provides 1 influence, 3 industry, and provides an additional 3 industry per adjacent maker's quarter. So you build a pyramid. It collects industry. So the quarters, the emblematic quarters, do collect a tile's resources as well, depending on what they are. So, for example, the Babylonians collect food and science. There's not much science to be found on tiles on the ground, so it's kind of a bit of, you might find like an extra 3-4 points of science out of it, but it's not like, generally speaking, you're not going to get huge use out of that. But the Egyptian one collects industry. Now, industry is on like any forest, rocky terrain, all that kind of stuff, and or a mountain. And if you build maker's quarters adjacent to it, it adds 3 extra industry. So say you build in a triangle, you put because it's a hex-based system. If you put down a pyramid and then you're like, okay, well, I want to expand further out away from the town center, so you build the pyramid next to the town center, and you want to expand further away from the town center, you might build 2 makers' quarters, 1 on either top side of the pyramid, and then the pyramid generates an additional 6 industry, which is effectively an extra population. And because it's industry, the more you scale your industry up, the faster you get all your production done, which means the faster you can get everything else done. Because if you get your buildings done faster, you've got more output of everything. You've got more food coming in because you get your farmers' quarters done faster. You've got more industry coming in because you get your industry done faster. You can get your infrastructure, which, when I talk of infrastructure, those are the buildings that sit inside your city. They're not districts. So it's like, for those of you that have played Civilization, the Civilization titles, it's when you build something that doesn't appear on the map, basically, is what infrastructure is. And some of the infrastructure, the faster you get that out, obviously, the faster it starts paying itself off. So it's a exponential growth kind of deal with having the additional industry. So yeah, and the extra 1 influence is it's a bit of a write-off, but influences are quite hard to get early on, and you can build 1 emblematic quarter per territory that you own. Not per city, it's per territory. So if you attach an outpost to a city, you can put another one in that attached outpost's territory. So the influence adds up. It's not like a huge deal. They're definitely not an influencive, but it does add up and might help you get a couple of turns off of getting your next outpost or city up. So it's not bad. And then their emblematic unit is the Markabata, which is a chariot archer. It's a range combat unit, so it's an archer. Its ability is it can perform a full move after making an attack. So they can fire an arrow, and then they can right away. So hit and run, which is pretty useful. It's a pretty useful ability. Now, why? But that's not why the Markabata is really good. They have a lot higher strength than a standard classical era archer. Classical? Ancient era archer. Ancient era archers have like 16 strength. They're quite weak. But obviously they make ranged attacks which can't be retaliated against. The Markabata has like 22 strength or something. It's a really high strength. It does come quite late in the tech tree for the ancient era because you do need not just carpentry, but you need the wheel to build them, and you need access to horses and copper as well. I think you need both. Can't remember if you do need copper, but you definitely need access to horses, so a bit resource intensive. But they are higher strength than ancient era archers, and in the classical era, there is no upgrade for archers, which means archers quickly get outclassed by just about every other unit you can build in the classical era, except the Markabata, because they have higher strength and they don't get replaced by any of the classical era units. So you can still build them. Even after you age up to the classical era, you can still build Markabata. So you've still got a solid archer unit for the classical era, which is really, really good, because otherwise you'll have archers with 16 strength. They get engaged in melee by a swordsman with 25 strength, and the swordsman, when a ranged unit's engaged in melee, this isn't the case for all ranged units, but for ancient era archers it definitely is, they lose 5 strength. So they go down to 11 strength fighting 25. So they get slapped. They get absolutely slapped. Like, they will die in one hit on poor terrain. If they're not on poor terrain, they might not die in one hit, but they're basically out for the count. Like, they'll have another further -2 for being badly damaged. So generally speaking, the Markabata just having higher strength, a useful ability to be able to move after making an attack, that allows them to make a shot, get out of combat, maybe open up the field of battle so you can filter some melee units in to block your opponent. They're just really solid. So Egyptians, A tier. They've got a good civilization ability, you'll always get use out of it. Their Emblematic Quarter helps you scale up your economy early on, and their unit is really solid as well. And I don't want to talk too much about how you earn stars in the game, how you earn fame, which is kind of your score. But some stars are easier to get than others, and the Builder star is one of them. I'm not going to talk about it in terms of balance because I don't think it comes under balance that certain civs can get their stars easier, because there are certain war civs that can get their war stars easier. You see what I mean? So some people are like, oh, it's really hard to get expansion stars. Yeah, but there are some civs that it's much easier to get expansion stars, which aren't even expansion civs, like the Norse, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, Egyptians, generally speaking, I'm going to put them A tier. They're not S tier, in my opinion. They're very good. Like, there's everything about them is good, but I wouldn't call them S tier, and you'll see why when we get there. So the next ancient era civilization we have is one that is a big favorite of a lot of players, is the Harappans. And I'm going to be putting the Harappans on B tier. Now, why? A lot of people say the Harappans are hands down the best civ, or maybe tied for best civ in this era. I think the Harappans are a B tier civ. I don't think they're A tier, and I'll explain why. And I did play the Harappans a decent amount. Some people in my chat, in my Twitch chat, were like, Harappans, Harappans, like every game. They just love the Harappans. So the Harappans are agrarian. Agrarian cultures get like a power bar. I guess that's what you call it, a power bar that fills up as they generate more food, right? And when it fills up, they get access to 2 actions. Mother's Milk, which creates 1 population per territory in all of your cities, and Land of Plenty. Land of Plenty attracts, it steals 1 population from each adjacent territory in an opponent's city, right? So, say you have 3 territories that are next to an opponent's city, you click Land of Plenty, and it steals 3 population and puts it in those outposts, or straight into your city, assuming they're connected, right? if you click Mother's Milk, I honestly find the Mother's Milk ability is actually useful. Land of Plenty I kind of wrote off because I didn't really use it, and I found if you use it, it generates a grievance so people can go to war with you. Mother's Milk just gives you free population, right? It creates one pop per territory in all your cities. So say you're you're ancient era, right? So you only have one city. You might have two, but generally speaking, you have one city. Let's say you have 5 territories. You click that, you get 5 pop. Wow, amazing! And trust me, it is good. But the rate at which you generate agrarian, the agrarian power is based on how much food you produce, right? And obviously, early on in the game, you don't have the infrastructure to generate loads of food. So we'll come into this because the Harappans are all about generating food, right? Fertile inundations is their special civilization trait. You get 1+ food on districts producing food, so that's your farmers' districts, and +1 food on rivers. +1 food on rivers. If you're not near a river, the Harappans lose half their bonus, right? Now there are plenty. I did find in the scenario there were plenty of rivers that spawned, but we're not sure if like that's going to always be the case in like random maps and stuff. So, but for now, let's just assume that you get a river. So +1 food on your rivers, pretty decent. You know, it's all right. You know, it's nice. Say you settle your city on the curve, the bend of a river, and you get like let's say best case scenario, you get like 4 river tiles, right? You get like 4 of them. That's a +4 food just for settling the city down. It's less than 1 population working on food, but you know it's nice early on in the game to get that bonus food. Um, but it's not like some people are like whoa, it's loads of food. It's not as much as it's not crazy. Yeah, don't get too worked up about it. The emblematic quarter is the canal network. It basically is a farmer's district in that it gathers food like a farmer's district, but it provides 1 food on neighboring tiles which are producing food. So if you say you build it out, again, it's a hexagon grid. Say I've got my city center and I build the canal network, 1 to the right, then that will gather from 3 tiles. If all those tiles produce food, they all produce an additional 1 food. So that's not only am I gathering all that food from those tiles, which generally speaking, a tile will range from 1 to about 3. They can get higher, but generally 1 to 3. Say you're on average tiles, right? Average tiles, they produce 2. You build this. I'm now collecting 3 from those tiles, because those are tiles which produce food, and I'm collecting from 3 of them. So rather than collecting 6, I'm collecting 9. So that's a 50% increase, which is quite a lot, especially early on in the game. That's a pretty big bonus. That's a bigger bonus than the Civ ability, generally speaking, because the Civ ability is reliant on a certain tile, which is rivers. The canal network doesn't care. However, the canal network itself is considered as a river tile. So the tile you place it on also gets +1 food. So that's kind of nice. Or it gets +2 food because it's a river and it's a district producing food, so it gets +2. And then if you place it on a 2 food tile, that's now a +4 food tile. I think actually placing the district gives even more food, but yeah, either way. The idea is you build the canal network and then build more farmers' quarters around it because they will treat it as a river tile and also they will be producing more food from there because their districts that produce food. So it's quite easy to boost your food up to like growing your population 1 every turn. However, the amount of food you actually need to produce to use the agrarian culture special ability, the Mother's Milk, the Land of Plenty, the amount of food you need to actually trigger those regularly, like we're talking like let's say 5 turns, every 5 turns, right? Because you can only grow a maximum of 1 population per city per turn, right? You can't grow, if you're producing 1,000 food surplus, you'll still only grow 1 pop. If you're producing 50 food surplus and that's enough to grow 1 pop, then there you have it. However, if you're growing 50 food surplus, and that's your entire empire's surplus, then your ability might take 30 turns to come off cooldown, right? If you're producing 1,000 surplus food, it might come off cooldown literally every turn. And if clicking the Mother's Milk would give you +5 population, then you have rapidly increased the pace at which you can get population. Now, again, this ties in with how I treat the Babylonians. The cooldown for the agrarian ability takes quite a long time to come off cooldown early on in the game when you don't have the infrastructure set up to produce loads and loads of food, right? The Harappans help you get your food infrastructure built up faster, but not at the quantity that's required to get that cooldown ticking quickly. They'll get it fast-ish, but not like, in my games I was finding like I'd click it once before I hit the classical era, right? That's the realism of it. That's the realistic. Idealistically, you'd be like, oh sweet, I'll get like an extra 20 population in the ancient era. You won't. The Harappans are good, but they're not that good, okay? They'll get you an extra click of population, which might be another 3 or 4, right? Which is good. It's helpful. But it's by no means like game-endingly broken. So I'm not even going to put them in A tier for that. Especially since, let's get to their unit. Their unit, the Runner, is a unique scout. Now, scouts, when you age up from the prehistoric to the ancient, all of your tribes turn into scouts. So the Harappans get a unique scout, and you'd be thinking, wow, I can just like... And there are people who've said, let's go scout rush people. Now, playing on the highest difficulty, you cannot scout rush people, because scouts do not have enough strength to fight city levy. They just don't, okay? You can't convince me otherwise. They just don't. If your opponent's got one city levy, there's still a chance they'll beat four Harappan runners. Even if you keep, because they heal up between fights, so even if you lose the fight and then send in another unit, because you can't reinforce battles yet, that's a technology you have to research. It just doesn't work. Are the Harappan runners good for bullying other nations' scouts, though? Yes, they are. They're quite good at that. They're quite good at bullying other people's scouts, so they stay away from your borders, and they also get their special ability is not only have they got slightly higher strength, and I think they get an extra point of movement as well. They generate money when collecting curiosities, which are kind of like goody huts on the map. However, I will say the goody huts in the VictorOpendev were rubbish. Like, they were literally like, oh, you got a goody hut, +3 science, +3, right? +3. Or like, oh, +5 gold. Like, I get more by putting a population for one turn on that job, right? The goody huts were trash, right? And the Harappan runners, it doesn't specify how much additional money they make, and honestly, I just didn't notice it. I'd collect like, and there weren't those many curiosities anyway, so like, generally speaking, the runners, their special ability is kind of a write-off. I just, just not gonna pay attention to it, honestly. Just, they generate money when collecting curiosities, yeah, you can say that, but I didn't notice it, so obviously not that relevant. But as far as the unit goes, slightly higher movement, kind of good at bullying other people's scouts, sure. Though the trick is, what you want to do is once you hit the ancient era, you want to have some of your scouts, your tribes that have now become scouts, you want them to be close to the city that you want, your first city that you want to build, so you can disband them. And when they disband, they get added as population into the city, which will give you some early population to work with. And generally speaking, what you want to do is you want to span about four minimum, because you can put a couple on industry, a couple on science, or you can put some on food, because if you're playing the Harappans, you want lots of food, right? You want lots of pop growth. So you want to be able to disband like multiple populations onto your starting city. So even though you get special scouts, you're going to be disbanding half of them just to boost your city's early production. So you might have like 4 of these guys running around the map, and if you're having them run around as pairs, so they can beat off other people's scouts, then you're not actually doing a whole lot of scouting. You'll do plenty of scouting, don't get me wrong. You'll still get like the stuff you want to get scouted. You'll still get it scouted, but yeah, they're not as crazy as some people have made out. So Harappans overall decent, but they don't have the infrastructure. Again, they're kind of like they're like the Babylonians in that they don't have the infrastructure to make the most use out of their abilities. However, unlike the Babylonians, they are a civilization that helps you get that infrastructure set up. The Babylonians let you research all of these cool things that you just can't build because you don't have the production and the population to make use of it. But the Harappans will get you the population to do it. It's just when compared to the Egyptians, who have picking the Egyptians gives you stuff that's relevant in the next era and every era. The Harappans +1 food on rivers is kind of it's tile specific, right? It's tile specific. So if you've got rivers, great. If you don't have many rivers, then that's kind of wasted. So Harappans are a bit more of a niche pick, but they're a better niche pick than, say, like the Babylonians. The Babylonians aren't even a niche pick. They're just the science civ of the era. It's just then, like, science civs in the first era I don't think are very good. So Harappans, B tier. Fine, there you go. Next on the list, we have, if I can find them, we have the Hittites. The Hittites. I have to think about where I'm placing these because I don't want to put them too high. I think we're putting the Hittites in B tier. Hittites in B tier. Okay. Now, I actually found the Hittites to be pretty good. Especially on the highest difficulty, all AI units get +2 strength. The Hittite civilization bonus is all your units for the rest of the game get +1 strength. All your units. So if you pick the Hittites, you're just giving all of your units extra strength every era for the rest of the game. Your units are slightly better, which is never bad. So they have a never bad civilization bonus. Good. They are a militarist culture. Militarist cultures get the ability to raise a army of militia, so the leve units that you receive when you get sieged. They can raise the leve units from their cities preemptively. They can use them to attack or defend, but they cost population as per regular units. You can disband them back as population, so that's cool. I found the militarist ability. I very rarely used it. Because they're just kind of trash units. However, if you're about to get, this is where the militarist ability is good. If you're about to get attacked and you're a militarist nation, you can raise your population as leve, so it'll raise about 4 of them. So say you have a population of 8 in your city, you've got a population of 10, let's say. Somebody sieges your city. 4 of the population will act as as defenders, right? The other 6 will just be sitting on their asses, just running around like headless chickens because the city's under siege. If you're a militarist civilization, you can preemptively raise 4 of your population as leve with the draft ability, and then the enemy sieges the city. You have the 4 automatic defenders from levied from your population, but you also have the additional 4 you just raised. So now you have 8 defense. You've double the garrison, and once the fight is over, you can just disband them if any of them survived, right? So the militarist ability is not actually very good offensively until later in the game. I think in the industrial era, your leve units become like riflemen with I think they become like musketeer or rifle units, so they actually become half decent. But generally speaking, the levies that you raise are kind of trash, so you wouldn't realistically be using them in an offensive campaign, but as a way of generating additional defensive forces for a city, it's actually really useful. I didn't personally use it very much, but I can see the relevance of it, right? It's just that I didn't use it very much. So that's the militarist ability. As I said, the civilization ability is all units get +1 combat strength. That includes the militia as well. It's just always good. So it having abilities which are never bad, it automatically is putting a civilization higher up on the list. Like the Babylonians' ability is never bad because it's +2 science every tech you get, but like the Assyrians, +1 movement to all your units is never bad. Like it's not a niche ability, it's always good, but it's not. If you compare extra movement, that makes your army more maneuverable, but the Hittites make your army stronger, which generally speaking, you would rather have your army be stronger than to have it be slightly more maneuverable. And it's only slightly as well. So, though the Hittites only make your army slightly stronger, it's still something to keep in mind. So, yeah. The Emblematic Quarter is not actually a district. It's your outposts. So your outposts that you place on the map that you would normally attach to cities, the Hittites get a special one called an awari. The awari is automatically fortified like a garrison. So if you have troops fighting on it or next to it, they get um, +1 combat strength. If they are fighting on it and they get attacked by an archer, they get building cover, which gives them like 4 extra strength against archers. So it automatically fortifies the outpost, which is nice, and you can spawn units in it like a garrison without attaching it to a city. Now this sounds really niche, and at first I was just like, how am I going to use this? But honestly, it's like think about it in like another 4x terms, in like say Civ, because I play a lot of Civ. It's like forward settling your opponent, but the units that you train in your capital, rather than appearing in your capital, they appear in your forward city. Imagine that, right? That cuts like so many turns off of movement. Like generally speaking, it cuts about 2-3 turns off of movement, especially before wheel, where there are no roads between outposts and cities and stuff. So it cuts like a couple turns off movement, and the ability to just put units, you could go, cool, I want to train a scout. I'm going to put him out on that outpost on that border there. He can go scout out in that direction. And then my other outpost on literally the other, you can have one outpost on a territory connected on the left side to your capital. And you can have an outpost connected to your territory on the right side of your capital. You can go, cool, I haven't explored the left much, so I'll spawn a scout over on that outpost. And that cuts time off his exploration because he doesn't have to move out from the city. And then on my right side, there's an enemy civilization who's been moving troops through my borders. So I'm going to spawn some warriors and some archers out on the right side. So I'm going to get 3 units out on the right side as well. It's like that's just saved you so much time. It's really useful. Like it's super useful. It's not an economic bonus because they don't get a special district, but like it just like what an economic bonus would do, which is save you turns. The Hittites save you turns when it comes to exploration and doing invasions, which is really good. Like it's such a weird thing. I didn't think I was actually gonna like use the ability of the Hittite emblematic outpost as much as I did, but I was literally, if I ever picked Hittites, I was always using it. I was always using it because it was just that relevant. So that's good. However, now we move on to the Hittites' unique unit. Oh boy, this feels bad. The Gigir is a unique chariot unit. It requires horses, and it requires 1 horse and 2 copper to be able to build these. So you have to get lucky and get the right resources to build them. They are like 23 strength, I think. 23, so they're technically 24 strength for the Hittite ability. They receive a charge bonus, which gives them extra strength if they attack. If they move, then attack non-adjacent enemies. So a unit that's in a tile and they don't have other dudes near them, that gives them a combat strength bonus. That's like what all charioteers or heavy cavalry get. The Gigir's special ability is called suppression. When they attack a unit, the unit they attack can either move or attack next turn, but it can't do both. And you're thinking to yourself, whoa, chaff, that's a great ability. They have to either move, say you attack an archer, they either have to move or they have to fight, right? And they don't want to be fighting in melee. Well, an archer attacking into melee doesn't cause a combat penalty. It's only when they get attacked in melee. Now, here's the thing. If I'm attacking a unit with a melee unit, and their option is either to stand there and fight or move away, they're gonna just stand there and fight, right? Or they're just gonna, yeah, like. And if they are gonna pull back to a more advantageous location, then if they were a melee unit, they can't move and attack anyway. If they're a ranged unit, then sure, you got a little bit of value there, but honestly, the suppression ability is not relevant on melee units. I never once trained these guys because I just didn't think they were relevant. They come very late in the ancient era. You need to have very specific resources to build them. They're quite resource intensive. And it's like, oh, I could just build more archers or more spearmen. Now, here's another thing. Their combat strength does not overpower spearmen. The only way they overpower spearmen is if they get that charge in. And once they've got their charge in, the spearmen then have the upper hand. It's not a massive upper hand, although on the highest difficulty they do end up being 27 strength spearmen fighting 24 strength Gigir. So the spearmen still have an upper hand. As long as you're on the highest difficulty, they actually have quite a relevant combat difference. If you're on like normal difficulty, then it would just be a 1 point difference, so it's not actually that bad. But generally speaking, you need bronze working to get access to copper, and you need wheel to get access to chariots. So you need more techs to get access to chariots, and the units that counter them come like techs earlier. So like by the time you get these dudes out, there's going to be a bunch of spearmen, and spearmen have higher strength than warriors, which are the basic melee unit. So once the AI can build spearmen, they will just build spearmen. And to note, the classical era, there are a lot of civilizations in the classical era where their unique unit is a spearman. Or there's a decent number of unique unit spearmen, both in the ancient era and, well, yeah, like there's a couple in the ancient era and there's a couple in the classical era. So if your Gigir go up against a classical era unique unit spearman, they are going to get massacred, right? So you can't fight those civilizations full stop. And if you go up against anyone else with Gigir in the classical era, well, chances are like, I mean, classical era swordsmen have higher strength than Gigir, so they don't feel powerful enough to actually warrant creating them. So it's weird that the Hittites being a militarist civ, and I'm actually still going to put them at B tier, that I wouldn't use their their emblematic unit. I just wouldn't use it very much, or at all. It's just because the extra combat strength and the outpost is so useful. It's really hard for me to stress. It's not. I mean, I am a bit of a Hittite fanboy, historically speaking, like the actual culture. But genuinely they are so useful. The combat strength is always useful. The Awari has so much utility to it. Yeah, like Hittite's good. B tier, easy. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the next civ. I think it's the Mycenians next. It should be. Here we go. The Mycenians. Another military civ. Mycenians. Oh boy, this is a difficult one. I'm going to be putting the Mycenians in B tier. Mycenians, B tier. Now, a lot of people are saying that the Mycenians are a very defensively styled civilization. We'll go over why they think that is. We've got brutal upbringing as the civilization ability for the Mycenians. They modify units production cost via industry, which also changes their buyout. If a building or unit requires less industry to produce, it requires less money to buy out as well. So, it modify unit production cost by 25%. So they get a quarter off of all their unit production, which early on in the game, when you have lower outputs, that actually makes a big difference. There's a lot of turns you can save with that. Secondly, we have there's a second ability here: 25% experience on creating a unit on city or outpost. 25% effectively translates to 1 veterancy level. So as units fight more, they get veterancy, which gives them more combat strength. So Mycenians effectively have unit production down by 25% and 25 and +1 combat strength to all their units. And you might be thinking, oh, that's just straight up better than the Hittites. Not really. The Hittites, because they give base combat strength, means the Hittites are still able to get the veterancy. The Mycenians start you at veterancy 1, So whilst they start out having the same combat strength, it's easier for the Hittites to then get veterancy 1 than it is for the Mycenians to get veterancy 2. Yeah? So there is a distinct difference between gaining veterancy and actually just having raw bonus combat strength. But the Mycenians also giving military unit production is fantastic. So very like you're gonna be building units, right? Unless you're playing real Resident Sleeper Solitaire Builder civs, but like you're gonna want to build some military units, which means that the Mycenians are gonna make them cheaper, which is always good. Secondly, we have the Emblematic Quarter, which is the Cyclopean Fortress. Again, this has the same problem as other districts, sort of, not quite. It's a garrison, right? So it's a garrison, you can build it, cool, good stuff. You get +2 combat strength for units adjacent or inside the district, right? Which is higher than a standard garrison. It's got 15 district fortification, so it's higher than a standard garrison. A lot higher, actually. It actually gives stability, unlike the other, like the Assyrian one. The Assyrian one is just literally trashed here compared to this, but still. You can spawn units out of it, it becomes fortified, and it increases the movement point cost of tiles within range of it by 1 for hostile armies. So if you're trying to move around it on the outside, it costs you more movement. It basically makes all the terrain around the tiles around it into difficult terrain in terms of movement. However, well, sort of, it's not quite that simple, but yeah, it basically just makes it awkward to move around it. However, you can only build the Cyclopean Fortress as attached to your city centre. It's not like other garrisons, you can't just build it out in the middle of nowhere and spawn units from it. You have to attach it to your city centre. So whilst it is a very powerful defensive building, again, we come under the problem. Would I rather build this, or would I rather build 3 or 4 units in the same time? Because I can use those units offensively and kick people's ass. And it also uses up a tile that you could otherwise be working on. So again, I don't see. I never built the Cyclopean Fortress. I'd never find a use for it because even though it is better, it's stuck to being attached to your city centre. It should act like other garrisons and just be buildable anywhere in the territory, not attached to the city centre. Then I would build it because it would be a very powerful city garrison and the Mycenians would get a solid bonus from it. It would be really useful. Anyway, besides that, having that issue, which kind of brings it from being this is in theory, this is a really good garrison, this is a huge bonus, to being, oh, well, I have to attach it to the city centre, so it's actually just an economic disadvantage. So aside from that, they get their emblematic unit, which is the Promachoi. The Promachoi are a unique warrior unit. Warriors have base 18 strength of 18. The Promachoi have 21. Or I think they have 20 or 21, and they get an extra +1 from the veterancy. Either way, the bonus of the Promachoi, that's it. They're just a stronger warrior. Warriors are like one of the first units you can build. They're literally available from a first tech in the tree. Promachoi get +3 combat strength when they are attacking in the first round of combat, right? And it's only when attacking. If you're attacking them, no. So the Mycenians want to be on the attack. They want to be the ones initiating the battles. They want to get that initial shock charge in and cut a couple of units off the board to give them a distinct advantage. That's what the Mycenians are about. People are like, oh, Mycenians got a really good defensive fortress. Yeah, cool. That's great. But the Mycenians are all about that shock charge right at the start. Enter combat, I initiate. The way to beat the Mycenians is to just initiate combat on them, because that is not what their units are good for. Now, the first round of combat counts the first round, so even if you attack the Mycenians, when it rolls around to their turn, it's still technically the first round, so when they make their attacks with the Promachoi, they do get the +3 strength. However, if you initiate combat, you're the one that can deal damage first, so you might be able to pick off one of the Promachoi before they can then get to that shock phase, which means it will be easier on you than if you let them make the attack. So, yeah, generally speaking, However, the Pro-Makoi are really solid units. Like, they hold their own against classical era swordsmen as long as they're the ones making the attack. So they take a bit longer to get outdated because they're kind of like they're not as good as the Egyptian Makabata in that they just fill a slot that is otherwise unfilled in the classical era. They're not that good, but they're solid. You know, if you've got Pro-Makoi on the board, and it's like, I have a choice. Do I upgrade my Pro-Makoi into classical era swordsman, or do I spend my gold doing something else? Well, you're more incentivized to spend your gold doing something else, because the Pro-Makoi will still be relatively decent units in the classical era anyway. So, there you have it. That's why we're putting these guys a B tier. Unfortunately, if they had a good district, they would be A tier. But because they don't have a good district, it's like they're the opposite. The Hittites don't have a good unit, but the Mycenians don't have a good district. So that's why they're B tier. They're solid. Both of them are solid picks for their own reasons. But neither of them have that extra bit of spice to really push them up to A tier. The Egyptians just have all good stuff. Not quite the best, but all good stuff. So that's why we're putting Mycenians in B tier. Right, next. Sorry, I'm a bit sniffly today. I need to get some more tea down me. Right, next thing's on our list, the Nubians. The Nubians were the civilization I transcended all the way from the ancient era to the early modern era, and got my absolute highest score of almost 20,000 fame on. I think the Nubians are S tier. These are the merchant style civilization of the ancient era. There's another merchant civ, but I think the Nubians are the best, and we'll get into why exactly that is. Now, merchant cultures. They are all about generating money. They double the gains of money when selling a resource and halve the cost when buying them. Any resource you buy via trade can be repurchased by other empires at a premium. Now, if you're playing on higher difficulties, obviously the AI has more gold that they generate, right? So they are more willing. The AI is more willing and more early on going to buy your resources, so they will inadvertently fuel your economy by buying all your resources early on, assuming you get a trade deal. And you can also buy resources from them at half price, which is pretty useful. And you can resell the things that you buy at a premium, which I never noticed if the AI actually took me up on that offer or not. But if it happened, it happened. Now that's just the merchant culture bonus, right? And the fact that you get double money from selling and half cost of buying resources is quite relevant, right? I don't want to talk about the cultures having either agrarian or militarist or merchant as being specifically part of their balance, but, and it isn't the reason why I rate the Nubians so highly, but it is helpful. And also just so you guys know what the merchant culture does. Right. The Nubians' ability is Golden Dreams. You get 4 extra gold, 4 extra money on luxury resource deposits, and 4 extra money on strategic resource deposits. Now, when you unlock the calendar technology, which is one of the first techs in the game, that enables you to build artisan quarters on luxury resource deposits. Generally speaking, a territory will have anywhere between 1. It will either have 0, 1, or 2, but I generally found most territories had 1 or 2 luxury resources in them. Sometimes they'd have 3 or more, but generally speaking, it's about 1 or 2. And you can build an artisan quarter on the deposits, detached from your city center. You just build them out in the middle of nowhere. And when they collect from the resource deposit, they'll collect the food, the science, the industry, and the gold. They'll collect everything on that tile. So it's basically a additional tile that your city works with all the extra bonuses. Adding 4 gold to them doesn't sound like a lot, but consider this. If I put a worker on producing money via the trader job, they produce 6 gold, right? If there is on average 1 or 2 luxury resources and about 1, we'll say 1 strategic resource in every territory, that means every territory I'm getting one additional population working the trader job, or slightly more than that, because if you have two, it produces 8 gold, which is more than a trader. So as far as providing their worth in population via their actual ability, the Nubians trait actually does provide a effective population bonus by freeing up the need to put people on trader jobs. Now, money is also useful for another thing. The earlier on in the game you are, the cheaper buying things out is, right? So in the ancient era, that's when things are the cheapest to do buyouts. That includes infrastructure, districts. Like some of the earliest districts literally cost like 100 gold, right? Like less than 200 gold to buy them out, to instantly produce them. And that's 5 turns you've just saved, just instantly getting them out there. And having instantly purchased that district with the buyout option, which I do believe the buyout option is a bit too powerful and it should be toned down. I'll do that in another video, but as it speaks in terms of balance, the Nubians are so powerful because they have the ability to generate money early on, and this goes into their emblematic quarter, the Meroe Pyramids. The Meroe Pyramids are the emblematic quarter to the Nubians. They provide 2 industry, 2 money. They also exploit tiles for industry and money. So if you build them next to a luxury resource deposit, they actually increase the amount of money you generate from that luxury resource, or strategic, because the Nubians get bonus money on luxury and strategic. So you can build a Meroe pyramid next to, say, pearls or ebony or something, which is a luxury resource, or you can build it next to copper or horses, and they'll produce more money. So it's got that bonus. But besides giving the 2 industry and 2 money, they provide 3 more money per adjacent maker's quarter. Right? So whereas the Egyptians get more industry per maker's quarter they build next to the Egyptian pyramids, the Nubians get more gold. Now, traders, the market district or the traders district that allows you to that produces money on a tile requires a end of era technology in the ancient era, right? And the payoff for building traders districts is that they don't gather food or industry, and most tiles produce food or industry. They don't produce gold and they don't produce science. Most tiles don't. There are some tiles that produce gold. Normally luxury deposits produce gold, and some tiles produce science. Normally strategic deposits or like whatchamacallit, terrain features. I'd like to see some terrain features that produce money, but currently there isn't any. So, as far as I could see in the open dev. But yeah, the Meroe pyramids basically replace the need to build traders districts in the ancient era. You just don't need to build any, which means you can go all in on food and industry, and you will naturally just acquire a huge amount of gold as well. Right? That's why the Nubians are so powerful. They could just completely ignore producing gold and they end up with loads of gold, right? It's just something that happens. So that's why I think the Nubians are S tier. They acquire, and we haven't even talked about their unit yet, and their unit's also really good. So the Nubians' ability allows them to generate one of the key resources of the game without investing in that resource at all. And at that stage of the game, unlike science, where you don't have the infrastructure set up to make use out of the technology that you're researching faster, the Nubians produce money. And money allows you to speed up the process of literally anything that you need at the time. Want to rush out a district? Bam! Do that with money. You want to rush out a unit because you're about to get attacked? Bam! Do it with money. You want to rush out a scout? Do it with money, right? You need stability? Buy some luxury resources from your neighbors. Don't have enough copper to build spearmen to counter your opponent? That's okay. You can use money to buy some copper off one of your neighbors. It's just always right. It's not only is it never bad, but it's useful in so many ways that it's hard to really state how much of a difference having all that early cash is. And it is about how early you get it, right? Like every other merchant civ in every other era makes the Nubians look like they're producing pennies compared to like gold bullion, right? Of like the Axumites or the Ghanaians or the Dutch or whatever, like all the merchant civs in the later eras, they make like stacks. They make so much more gold than the Nubians. But the thing with the Nubians is they're generating that money at a crucial stage of the game, and that is why they're so powerful. It's the era that they're actually making that cash in. Now, onto their emblematic unit, the Tarcetti Archers. Again, they get a ancient era archer replacement. They have 2 more strength, so they're 18 strength rather than 16, which is helpful. It makes them as strong as warriors. Now, they'll still lose in a melee against warriors, but the Tarcetti Archers have the ability to shoot above obstacles without penalty, right? That means they can shoot over forests, they can shoot over city districts, and I think they have 1 more range than standard ancient era archers. So they're slightly stronger archers, which means that they're going to be relevant in the classical era as well, because there's no archer improvement in the classical era. So they're relevant for that reason. They ignore terrain for picking targets, and they have longer range, which means you can have your melee units out in front, and you could be there could be a forest between the archer or like a mountain or whatever. There could be a mountain between the Nubian archers and what they're firing at, and they'd still be able to hit them. God knows how, but they can shoot over mountains, right? They could shoot over Mount Everest. Like, that's how good they are. So they've got a great ability to generate you that early cash. They've got a industry based district that also produces you a ton of money, and they have a unique archer unit which makes them more relevant in the classical era. So Nubians are easily my S tier civ. I think these guys they absolutely rock socks. Like I said, my high score was scored with the Nubians because I thought the Nubians were more powerful than any other civilization in the ancient era. I do feel that the Nubians as a whole become less, like, their ability, as with most the ancient era abilities, not all of them though, but some civs in the ancient era, their abilities are more relevant as you get later into the game. Like the Mycenians giving you 25% off unit production is always relevant, especially later on when units require more industry to build. The Nubians +4 gold on Lux and strategic. Assuming you have like you need like 25 luxury or strategic resource deposits in your empire, which you will have, to generate 100 gold, which is like a drop in the pond later in the game, right? It really is. But again, it's about, if we're talking purely ancient era, the Nubians have the fastest and most powerful economic start out of any other civilization, and they're still relevant in the classical because their bonuses are still relevant then. That's just how it is. And the fact you don't need to build market districts to make a good amount of gold in both the ancient and in the classical era, like you can get your merchant stars just not building any market quarters. You just don't need to. I mean, some civs will struggle to do that. The Nubians don't. They just build their Mero pyramids. They just build their Emblematic Quarter, build some makers quarters, and job done. They make loads of money. So that allows them to basically just not have to build market districts, and they get all of their stars for that, which helps them advance a lot faster as well. So, yep, Nubians, S tier. Right, next civ in the ancient era is the Olmecs. These are the first aesthete nations, so we'll go over what aesthete nations are. Let me just find the Olmecs on here. Here we go, here's the Olmecs. Olmecs are going straight to A tier. A lot of people have said the Olmecs are the strongest civilization. You'll see why. I do rate them. I would rate them higher than the Egyptians if I had to, so I'd put them here. I should probably order these actually. I'd probably put it like... do I want to put the Harappans a bit lower? I don't know. I'd probably put it something like... yeah, probably something like this. I do have a bit of distaste for the Harappans. I'm just not a big fan of them, but I do think they're economic. Yeah. I'll probably put them like that. But anyway, Olmecs are an aesthetic culture, which is like the influence culture. They get 2 unique bonuses, just like the agrarian ones. They get like a bar which fills up, like a power bar, and they get 2 options with it. You get influence bomb, so when you generate enough influence, you can instantly convert a territory to your cultural influence, regardless of its current values. It will gradually trend back to whatever culture has more influence in that territory, but you can culture bomb it to then get grievances like, oh, you're oppressing my cultural people there, despite the fact that they're actually trending back to whatever culture they were. Uh, it can also help stop like cultural osmosis with your people clamoring for a civic that you don't want. So if your people are like, oh, we're like 50% Olmec and 50% like Nubian, we want to get the civic that the Nubians are running, and you're like, no, I don't want that civic. It's going to cause a stability hit, so you can culture bomb your own territory if it's being a problem. That stops people getting grievances on you. So that's kind of I was like, whatever. It is what it is. It's not like culture bombing in Civ. It's not like completely broken and just gets you territories for free. It doesn't quite do that, but it's whatever. Secondly, is tourism yields. Increase economy gains from cultural influence control by 100% for 5 turns. I have no idea what economy gains you get from having influence control, but apparently you get 100% for 5 turns, so that's cool. I when I was playing an aesthete nation, right? I'll put it like this: when I was playing an aesthete nation, I always generated enough influence that I could have this on constantly, right? So I have no real idea how much this impacted my economy, only that it did, and I had it up all the time. So presumably that was useful, but I didn't really ever like. There was no tutorial in the open dev, and it was very hard to figure out what certain things did, and I never really figured out what the tourism yield bonus from aesthetic cultures did. But it's there, so there you have it, I guess. Um, you get all right. So the civilization bonus for the Olmecs is +2 influence on territory. So every time you put down an outpost, you claim that territory. It gives +2 influence on that territory. Influence is probably the hardest resource to generate in the ancient era, and is directly used for acquiring new tiles, right? And not like buying tiles like in Civ's culture system or anything like that. It's territories as a whole. Like if you play Endless Legends, you know how the territory system works. But when you put an outpost down, you claim the entire territory. Um, well, you contest the entire territory, I should say, because other people can still move through it. But you need influence to do that. And the more outposts you have, or the further away the outpost is from a city, a connected city tile, the more it costs. And it does get very expensive. So generating more influence per territory, it's basically like every territory I claim gives me more influence, which allows me to claim more territories, which allows me to get more influence, which allows me to claim more territories. And you get how the Olmecs are like really quick at expanding, especially in the early game where the faster you generate influence, the faster you will actually take territories over, which other nations will not be able to contest you, because even if they run in and go, aha, I'm going to ransack your outpost, you go, cool. Well, I'm still going to be able to generate enough influence to just take 3 more territories over what you can do because I'm the Olmecs, right? And this extends to their emblematic quarter, the Olmec head, which is that big stone head. If you've never seen an Olmec head, go take a look. They're just like big stone heads, really. um, but yeah, they look like stone golem heads, like out of D&D, like very like featureless, kind of like big stone head. Yeah, so stone golems. They build stone golems. They're able to animate giant magical constructs with their astrological powers, because that's what the Olmecs do. And these Olmec heads, they gather food, so they're kind of like a farmer's quarter. But they produce 2 influence. So, like the Egyptian pyramids produce 1 influence, the Olmec head produces 2. It also produces 3 food on the tile, and it provides 1 additional influence per adjacent farmer's quarter. So, the Olmecs are all about population growth and territory control. That's like their thing. They want to get large populations in their cities, and they want to get lots and lots of influence to like claim more and more territory. So that's kind of what they do. It's good. It's good. It's not like crazy. I wouldn't claim the Olmec head as being like game changing district. Like you build it where you can, but it's not like whoa, must build as quickly as possible. It's kind of just like yeah, I might as well build one and put a couple of. I mean, I'm gonna build a few farmers' quarters anyway. I might as well get a little bit extra influence for it. You know what I mean? Like it's just kind of like icing on the cake. Yeah. Their emblematic unit is javelin throwers. Now these are a replacement for archers, uh, or ancient era archers. They have 20 combat strength, so they're much stronger than they have more strength than like the Nubian archers. They don't have quite as much range. They have the same range as the ancient era archer, but the Nubian archers get extra range, so there you go. But 20 strength is solid. That actually makes them higher strength than warriors, right? So they are higher strength than the standard ancient era melee unit. Now, if you're actually playing on the highest difficulty, they're the same strength as the highest or the warriors, but because of the +2 that the AI get, but they're still powerful range units in their own right. They are stronger on difficult terrain tiles. They get like a +3 strength bonus or whatever. So if they're standing on a forest or a river, they get strength bonus. Now rivers actually cause a strength penalty. So the Olmec javelin throws just negate the penalty of rivers when they're standing on them, which can be relevant. Depends where you're taking your fights. There are some areas, at least in the scenario, I'm assuming on maps this will happen as well, where there are like literally you can't move through a tile without standing on a river, which means that the Olmec javelin throwers have an inherent advantage that they don't take the penalty from rivers. But if they're standing on a forest, they get extra combat strength. Which means if a ancient era archer is trying to shoot at a javelin thrower, they're going to do minimum damage. They're going to do 5 to 25. That's how the minimum damage works. Whereas the javelin thrower is going to retaliate with 27 strength and absolutely just blitz half your archer regiment with one attack, right? So you'll be doing like 10 damage on average, which is a tenth of their HP. And the javelin thrower is going to do 50 damage and wipe half your archer regiment and kill them in 2 rounds. So javelin throws, and because again they are a replacement for archers, they are relevant in the classical era as well. So the Olmecs have very fast early game expansion, which is what you want. You want to be able to expand early and fast. Their emblematic quarter is nice. It's not like I wouldn't say the emblematic quarter of the Olmecs is OP. It's not. And even the ability of the Olmecs +2 influence on territory, I wouldn't say it's OP. Like the javelin throwers are solid, right? They've got a solid military unit to back up their early expansion. So they can expand, and they can expand quite aggressively because they've got that solid unit to back them up, right? All they need to do is get carpentry, which is like it's like one of the first techs you can get, which is how you get archers. They just have to tech that, and then suddenly you can't fight the Olmecs, right? If they want to expand onto that tile, you just got to let them do it because they're going to run up with the javelin thrower, throw down that outpost, and go, do you want to fight me with scouts? Because your scouts ain't going to win. Your scouts are going to get they're going to get slapped. So you can't. The Olmecs early expansion is basically free, which is why they're an A tier. It's a combination of all of these good, but not game-changingly powerful abilities that they have, which makes them a game-changing civilization. Which I think is an important distinction to make. I wouldn't say that anything about the Olmecs is inherently OP. Like, nothing that they do is overpowered. It's just that the stage of the game at which they get these bonuses makes them incredibly consistent and powerful. That's my take on the Olmecs. Some people are saying that S tier because they are allowed to free expand like that, but just taking more territory doesn't make you inherently more powerful. It's more a case of just taking more territory doesn't make you more powerful. That's basically what it comes down to. But it's what you do with that territory, which the Olmecs set you up for a builder civilization in the classical era, because then you have all this territory that you've got lots you can work with. So yeah, the Olmecs transition into builder style gameplay very, very well. They could also transition into warlike gameplay. That you could transition Olmecs into Huns pretty easily, and they would do a fantastic job at that too. So they're very flexible early expansion civilization. So definitely gonna leave them in A tier there. Right, now we've got the Venetians, which are the second merchant civ in our list, and we're going to be putting them in beta. And I'm going to be putting the Phoenicians probably above everybody, honestly. They're probably one of the best beta nations, and many of the same reasons. So they're a merchant civ. Their civilization bonus is they get to modify all constructibles. It's trading pioneers. They modify all constructibles. This includes infrastructure and districts, not units, but infrastructure and districts. They reduce their buyout cost by 20%. 20%. So if something would cost 1,000 gold to buy out, it only cost 800 if you took the Phoenicians, right? So they save you a lot of money, especially early on in the game. As I said, where money is kind of hard to generate early on, the Phoenicians they stretch your cash out further. However, there's a few reasons they're B tier and not A tier or S tier. Their Emblematic Quarter is the haven. It's a replacement for the harbour. It functions as per a normal harbour, so it collects from sea tiles. It collects food, industry, science, and money from any sea tiles within its range. However, the haven also produces +2 money per adjacent coastal water or adjacent coastal lake. Now, if you get like a real like an inlet, I suppose, like you're generally speaking, you're gonna get 4 tiles, right? So that's +8 gold. If you're lucky, you might get 10 gold for every haven you build. But the extra gold is really relevant because you're going to want to build harbors anyway. So just getting extra money on them is solid. It also adds an extra trader slot, so you don't need to build a market district to get more trader slots if you need the traders, which is nice. But again, it's just like you're going to build harbors anyway, so just getting more gold out of harbors is great. And to note, if you have a unique harbour, you can only build one harbour per territory. Unlike other districts, you can only have one harbour. It doesn't count unique harbours. So if you have a unique harbour and then you age up and you just get the generic harbour, you can then build the generic harbour. So you get two harbours, which can really like slingshot your population growth. Because whilst the generic harbour won't generate money like the haven will, it will still generate a lot of food, and it also incentivizes you to build the infrastructure that makes your harbors produce more because you have more harbors, right? So yeah, I think Phoenicians that sort of interaction with how unique harbors don't count as standard harbors, so you can build more of them. That has a lot of relevance in depending on your civilization picks, but it does help their growth in the classical era regardless of who you pick. So that is something to consider. However, we get to their unique unit, and now this is something I want to talk about. Probably when I talk about balance in general for the game. The unique unit for the Phoenicians is the Byreme. It is a unique naval unit. I didn't build a single naval unit my entire playthrough. I played like 70 hours of VictorOpendev, and it was supposed to be like, oh, people should test out the new. We want this to be more naval oriented and be building more ships and stuff. I didn't build a single ship the entire time. I saw no reason to do so. So I basically classify any naval unit as a non-entity if it comes up on a civ, which means that that civ automatically cannot be A tier. It cannot, because they're missing a entire facet of their civilization, because I just found no use for them. Now, this in part stems from a problem with 4Xs that utilize embarkation, right? Embarking a unit onto the ocean, like land units, like say you build a warrior and you want him to go on the ocean. On older titles like Civilization 4, you needed to build actual transport ships, and transport ships would get destroyed by warships, right? In Humankind, you just research the technology and you can embark units onto the ocean, right? And you can't get the technology to embark units on the ocean in the ancient era. You have to be. It's one of the first classical era attacks. So What is your Byreme fighting? Well, it can go out and pillage other people's harbors. So if you're at war with someone, you build a Byreme, you go pillage their harbor. There's nothing they can do about it, right? You can do that. How relevant is that? Well, not really. It just isn't. Naval ships don't really have any impact on battles either. If you have a navy supporting an army, they need to give naval ships the ability to attack land units, even if it's just tile to tile. So like they can attack units on the coast, like early era land. I know late game you'll get naval units that have actual like offshore bombardment and stuff, but like they feel pretty useless in their current state. So I think naval units as a whole will be getting an overhaul, but my biggest take is embarking units actively hurts naval warfare. It might be nice for a quality of life thing. Oh, I can just embark my units and move them around. Ha ha ha. But it actively makes naval warfare kind of pointless because you don't need a navy to transport units around because units will transport themselves around. And the transports, I will say this, if humankind wants to make naval warfare more relevant, the transports need to be made weaker. Right now, the transports aren't weak enough. They're too strong. If you have two transports fighting a warship, they'll beat the warship, generally speaking. And there's some weird interactions to do with transports as well, which I might mention a bit later on. But generally speaking, transports should be made a hell of a lot weaker. They should have half the strength of a standard warship in that era, right? If your transports get caught out by a warship, they should just get they should get sunk instantly. There should be no contest at all. It should be a cakewalk for every warship to just like, because that's the whole point. A transport is supposed to be like especially in like the ancient era and stuff, they would have been a large barge, basically, just a huge barge with very little defensive capabilities. Whereas a warship is a fast moving ramming ship where like all of its crew is put in either as galley oarsmen to give it speed or as actual trained marines. And like fighting I can only imagine, obviously I've never done it myself, but I can only imagine that fighting on a moving ship on the open sea is probably a hell of a lot different than fighting on land, right? Like you actually have to get used to it. Like, and if you're not used to it, there's that you got things like seasickness, unsteady footing, the flow of combat. Also, it's much more one on one. It's not like there's a formation. If you're boarding a ship, it's just you got to just do it yourself. So naturally, Marines or like naval combatants, like actual units that are fighting on a ship, they would be naturally, or they'd be inherently better at single combat, which a transported unit of like a formation of spearmen, say, well, firstly, a spear is going to be no good on, or not going to be that useful for naval combat because it's close quarters and there's no formation fighting, so they're going to get chopped to bits by marines. So, like, I think warships need to they just need to either make warships more powerful, or they just need to make embarked units just like sitting ducks. They need to make them just completely useless. If you have troops embarked, they should just get torn apart by warships. That's how it should be. Um, to make naval units more relevant. But because of the current, and I am basing this balance on the current patch, Phoenicians don't make it to C tier despite their unit being a non-entity, because reducing buyout costs is really good and getting the extra money from their haven is very relevant as well. It's not as powerful as other civs. I might even go so far as to say that the Phoenicians are probably on the weaker end of this scale. I personally rate them quite highly because the buyout cost is incredibly useful, but it's more useful as a set. They're a setup civ. You take the Phoenicians not because you want to be really powerful in the ancient era, but because you want to get a power spike later on in the game when the buyout cost will be more relevant. Yeah. Because 20% off your buyout cost in the ancient era, if a building only costs 200 to buy out, it's going to save you 40 gold. Whereas and the Haven only generates 10 gold, whereas you could be the Nubians and be generating like 40 gold a turn instead. So it's like you just buy out things with the fact that you have more money, as opposed to the Phoenicians, which they stretch their money out because they don't make as much. But the Phoenicians come into their own a bit later on in the game when the buyout cost becomes more relevant. So I'm going to put them at B tier. If they had a more relevant unit, then they would probably be really, really solid. But moving on to a civ that I don't want to put in C tier really, but unfortunately with how some mechanics currently function in the open dev, and as I said, I've got to base things partly in how they function now, is the Jouot. I would actually normally rate the Jouot probably B or even A tier, but with how some mechanics are functioning right now, the Jouot are unfortunately C tier for reasons I'll explain now. Okay, so they're an aesthetic nation, so they get the culture bomb ability and the tourism yields, which is cool. But they're a bit of a weird. I would probably place the Jouot as a bit of an all-rounder civ, but their main function or their main ability or abilities aren't as relevant because of certain things. So their civilization ability is Harmonious Thought, which gives +2 stability on district. Districts normally reduce your stability by 10. The Jouot mean that your district's only reduced by 8. If you build a garrison, which gives 5 stability, instead it gives 7 stability. And if you build a commons quarter is a bit odd because commons quarters give 5 stability per adjacent district. So the Jouot make it so the commons quarter has a base 2 stability, which is a bit odd. But yeah, the Jouot make your garrisons a bit better, I guess, and they make the other districts less impactful on your stability. But put it like this: you're going to build more than 5 districts, which means the 6th district is stability neutral, which is pretty good, right? Pretty good. However, that being said, let's go through all their stuff first before I say why they're C tier. The Confucian School. The Confucian School is their emblematic quarter. It gives 3 stability, so rather than reducing stability, it gives 3 stability. And then a further +2 because of Harmonious Thought. That's probably why they put it at 3 rather than 5. But yeah, it ends up at being 5 stability. It produces 1 science and gives 5 science per adjacent mountain. And it gives you an additional researcher slot. So 5 science per adjacent mountain. If you have 2 mountains, which is ideally what you want minimum, is 2 mountains, you will get +10 science. So it becomes an 11 science tile, which is kind of like getting two pop on science, right? For a single district. That's pretty good, right? That is a better science bonus, arguably, than the Babylonians. Because the Babylonians get 1 extra science per researcher. They do get science per adjacent market quarter, not market, farmers quarter. But you need to build like the astrologer's house, then put 2 farmers quarters next to it. That's an extra 6 science. It produces 1, so that's 7. And then you need you need 4 people doing science to push it up to 11 science. Whereas the Jouot just build the Confucian School and have it next to 2 mountains and job done, it produces 11 science, right? Now, it's not that easy to compare, but you know, if you have a city that's close to mountains early in the game, and you can put a good Confucian School down, it's going to increase your research speed dramatically in the early era, right? And if you get really lucky and get like a Confucian School surrounded by 4 mountains, that's effectively like a 3 or 4 population district. It's insane. So the Confucian School is really solid for research. In fact, the fact that the Confucian School is as good as it is, you kind of don't need researchers in the ancient era as the Jouot. If you get if you get 1 or 2 really good Confucian schools, you kind of don't need to put any people on research because they'll just do all the research for you. Which allows you to use your population for other things. So pretty good emblematic quarter. Obviously, it's got no relevance to them being a Thet, which is an influence-based culture. It doesn't actually provide any influence at all. In fact, nothing that the Jouot do provides influence, which is a bit odd, but they have it. You do produce influence when you settle on natural wonders, So the way I treat the Zhuo is like if you spawn and scout and you get pretty good scouting and you see like two natural wonders pretty close to each other and there's some good mountains nearby, you might go, cool, that's a good spot for the Zhuo. But like that's very map. It's kind of niche based on map. So that's why I wouldn't rate them quite so highly, but there's other reasons for it as well. Let's go on to the emblematic unit, which is the Zhanchi. I'm sorry I can't show all of these. I'm getting them off the wiki and my own what I remember that they have, but yeah, I don't have the ability to like show them off as I'm going through. I'm not going to edit it in. Sorry guys, I don't have that much spare time. So despite COVID, I ain't got that much spare time. I need to spend my time Twitch streaming. So there you have it. But the Zhanchi is a special chariot, so again, very resource intensive unit in the ancient era and shows up quite late. It has the ability Mandate of Heaven. It gets bonus combat strength when stability is high. Now, I'm gonna have to apologize here. I played the Zhuo a couple of times and I never actually built the Zhanchi, so I have no idea how much combat strength they get when with high stability. I'm going to assume it's not going to be higher than 6. It's probably going to be about 3 or 4, because that's what most other unique units get as a combat bonus. But it might be 6 because it is based on stability, and your empire stability is on a scale. So keeping it high is a bit more difficult to do, and therefore the Zhanchi might get a +6, but I wouldn't think it'd be any higher than that. So I think they'd end up being about 28 strength unit if they had if they did get +6. Otherwise, it's about 26 strength chariot, which is still very good. But that being said, I never did actually build one. So why didn't I build one? Well, again, chariots show up when spearmen are kind of prevalent, especially on the highest difficulty. So they kind of lose a lot of their potential value. It's not a bad unit by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like a reasonably high strength unit that you might use to beat up on some archers or some horsemen, but nothing like crazy. So I wouldn't say it was like it's not a particularly strong emblematic unit, but it's not bad. It doesn't have its abilities are fine. It's basically just a strong unit. That's what it is. It's like the Pro McCoy. It's like a strong version of the unit that people get anyway. So it's just like a better version of that unit, which is fine. Yeah, it's hard to fault. But why is it that the bonus now stability is something that the higher stability you have, the faster you get civics, which are like policies in Civ 6, sort of. If you have high stability, you get civics faster. The Zhuo are all about keeping high stability, with the reduced cost of stability on districts, and the Confucian school gives stability, and the special unit requires high stability. So they're all about stability, right? So why is it that I don't really care about the Zhuo? Because surely the extra stability you gain from districts becomes more relevant the later in the game you are, when you have like 20 or 30 districts in a city or more. The problem is there's an ability called Procession, which is a very early civic to get. It's under the religious tree. Procession basically lets you spend a marginal amount of gold, like I think it's like 10 gold per pop in the city, which might be a bit more in the early game, but you don't really need to use it in the ancient era. You need to use it in the classical era onwards when your cities get a lot larger. Yeah, Procession lets you spend like a small amount of gold, and it generates 5 stability per pop in the city. So if you have 10 pop in the city, it generates 50 stability, which basically negates the stability of 5 districts. If you have 20 pop in the city, and honestly, it's not hard to have. By the end of the scenario, which is about 150 turns, most of your cities will be between 30 and 40 population. Just because obviously you're going to be building units out of that population, and you're not always going to be growing 1 pop per turn. So it will slow down, unless of course you focus everything on pop growth. But like when I did my mega city run, I think the highest population I got to was about 150. So yeah, that was with using the Harappans as an agrarian civ. I wanted to use the Celts as well, but the AI always took the Celts, so I couldn't get them. But either way, despite that, stability, because of the procession ability, stability is just really easy to get. And also, every time you buy a luxury resource, you get 5 stability. Every copy of a luxury resource. additional copies of a luxury resource, the effect is not as powerful. You need like 3 copies to get like an extra stability boost, but generally speaking, if you're buying like several types of luxury resources, that's like an extra 30-40 stability in your city. And then you use procession, and then you build a couple of pieces of infrastructure to boost stability, and basically you just don't have stability issues. You just don't. So that's the problem I have with the Jouot. It's just with certain interactions with the luxury resource mechanics and the procession mechanic, I find the Jouot are just too. Yeah, their stability focus just isn't very good because the other mechanics are just much better at doing it, and those are mechanics that everyone has access to. So that's why I put the Jouot in C tier there. But hopefully you guys like the ancient era tier listing. This is based purely on my experiences, and as I said, I played on the highest difficulty with all of these nations as much as I could, and also combining them with different. Obviously, I couldn't try everything out, but I did play, like I said, like good 70 hours of the VictorOpendev, so I have a pretty good understanding of. And I'm a long time. I haven't done any endless or other amplitude titles on the channel, but I am a long time fan of the Endless Space, Endless Legend, and just Amplitude's other titles. The Endless series in general. I've been a long time fan of that. I started playing it with Endless Space 1, so I kind of know how the system. It didn't take me long to pick the systems up because I already kind of knew how the Fidsy system. By the way, if anyone at the Humankind Dev Studios watches this, you missed out on calling it. You call it FIMS for Food Industry Money and Science. You should have called it FIGS, okay? Food Industry Gold and Science, because firstly, that is a cool name, right? FIGS instead of FIDS or FIMS. FIMS is a bit don't really FIMS, I don't know. It doesn't sound as good as figs. And also, this is about humankind. Like ancient era cultures and playing through civilization's development. Figs were like the crop of the Fertile Crescent, man. Figs. It's like a cultural symbol of that region of the world. That's why like humankind or civilization first started to like build up. Figs, man. You should have called the system Figs. Bruh, you missed an opportunity there. So, anyway, as I said, I am familiar with the Amplitude series, like systems and stuff, and because of that, I was able to pick the game up very quickly and start playing it on the highest difficulty and getting these high scores and trying the different civs out, and that's meant that I have a pretty solid, well-rounded understanding of how these work, and that's why I rate civilizations differently to other people. I think other people, they look at it on paper and go, yeah, I played like 2 runs with the Harappans, and my population growth was good. Yeah, so Harappans are obviously really strong, but it that's there's kind of a vacuum way of looking at it, and I'm trying to look at these civs in terms of how they interact with the later eras as well, and also like the Phoenicians inherently, I would probably call them a C tier ancient era civ, but because their buyout cost reduction is so good, I push them up to B tier. And the Jouot, I would normally put them at B or even A tier because stability is really helpful. But because other mechanics in the game interact with stability a lot better, the Jouot kind of fall down to the bottom. So that's like I'm basing these tier lists that I do. I'm going to do them one every era. You'll have seen by the title, but generally speaking, these tier lists are based on my personal opinion and interactions with the game, but they're not made in a vacuum. They are made from real experience playing the open dev, and hopefully that gives you guys an idea of how the open dev has developed. I will close off each of these videos by saying that I played it for 70 hours, guys. It's not like there was random maps. It was the same scenario over and over again, and I couldn't even access all the content because we weren't allowed to play industrial era. We couldn't play contemporary era, right? And when it ended, I was disappointed. I was genuine. I wasn't disappointed with the fact that so like the game was bad. I was disappointed I couldn't play more of it. I had one turn syndrome, right? One more turn, one more turn. I had that playing it. There are not many 4x titles. Like when I picked up Civ 5 and Civ 6, I played them for several hours and then was like, I think I've seen enough. I didn't really go back to playing them. Humankind, I got the same urge to play that I got when I first picked up Civilization 4. And I would come home from school and I would, this is when I was younger playing Civ 4. I'd come home from school and I would sit there and I'd smash out like 8 hours of Civ, like playing Civilization 18 Civs multiplayer, or I'd just play single player. Just I would play that for hours on end. Um, and I did the same thing with Humankind, and I never once got bored. There's always more strategies. I didn't even get to try out everything that I wanted to try out, right? So, like, even with 70 hours gameplay, I still didn't get to try all the wacky stuff I wanted to do, and all the cultures I wanted to try. And I didn't even have access to all the content. So, and this, again, this was just on a scenario map. This is even like random maps and stuff. This is just like literally one map. The settings are always the same. The AI is always the same every single time, right? So I want to end every video by saying that that is my core impression of the game, regardless of what my tier lists say or like what opinions I have about mechanics and stuff. Certain things do need balancing. Certain things I would like to have balanced. Some things I don't think are as much of an issue as other people might make out. Um, Having played the endless titles, but overall, Amplitude, when they release a game, I know they pushed it back, which is a real shame, but I trust their judgment, because when Amplitude makes a game, they do not release poor quality games. They just don't do it. They might release games with some balance issues, but like, what game doesn't have balance issues on release? Yeah, like pretending like that doesn't happen and that Humankind is somehow a worse game because it has balance issues would be disingenuous, because literally every game comes out with balance issues. It's impossible to balance everything perfectly. It just is impossible. So, but Amplitude doesn't release unfinished titles. They don't release poor games, right? The soundtrack is fantastic. The graphics are great. It's not quite as intuitive for people that haven't played it before, like an endless title, but the opendev didn't have a tutorial. The whole point was you're getting an early look at the mechanics and just like muddling your way through it. Now, for someone like me who's played the endless titles before, it made more sense, right? I was able to pick it up easier. Some people have some complaints about tooltips and stuff not being inherently obvious. These people have probably come from playing Civ 5 or Civ 6 or other 4X titles like Age of Wonders, maybe. And I don't blame them, because it isn't inherently obvious for people who haven't played the Endless series before. But at the same time, it's like the opendev was not intended as a tutorial. It was intended as a scenario for people to mess around with the mechanics. So I don't think it's valid criticism to say that the game has poor tutorial mechanics, because it was not intended as a tutorial. Whereas when the game releases, it will have an intended tutorial, I would hope. And it will also have better tooltips and such, because those are things that can be added as and when. So overall, very, very positive experience from Humankind. And if I was to recommend the game to people, I would say yes. Yes. If you are a fan of 4Xs, you will like Humankind. More importantly, if you're a fan of Amplitude's previous titles, Endless Legend, Endless Space 2, Endless Space 1, you will like Humankind. There is no doubt about it. You will like Humankind. It will be familiar, but it has innovation on the series, and it is good. If you are a fan of Civilization 5 and 6, now keep in mind I'm not a Civ 5 or 6 player. I play Civ 4. Yeah, I know, I'm a grognard. But as a Civ 4 player, I really enjoyed Humankind. Do I think Civ 5 and Civ 6 players will enjoy Humankind? Yes, I do. I do genuinely believe that Civ 5 and Civ 6 players will find some elements of familiarity with like how civics work and how the tech tree is more streamlined and not quite as like bulky as like the Civ 4 one might be, or at least modern Civ 4 one. And I also think that the Civ, sorry about that. Something got stuck in my throat for a bit there. This is what happens when I talk for too long, for like 2 hours in a row. I need to keep caffeinating myself, else I'll never get through this. But yeah, the mechanics in general, like the warfare is fantastic. I think people who perhaps wanted more complexity and more in-depth warfare in Civ 5 and 6, you will find that in Humankind. If you want the district, if you like the district placement and the city building aspects, they are really good in Humankind, with the ability to create mega cities and like the adjacency, like fiddling around with stuff and how terrain interacts with different districts and stuff. I think if you like playing builder, you'll get that fix with Humankind as well. If you prefer doing more like diplomacy and stuff, I think Civ 6 probably has that better with how the United Nations works, and um, who knows what the contemporary era will bring in Humankind. That might have more of the like global diplomacy options, but generally speaking, I think diplomacy is probably better in Civ 6 because it's got the city states and the way envoys and spies work. There's no espionage system in Humankind, as far as I know. Um, but yeah, things like espionage and the diplomats and envoys and the United Nations or the world conferences that Civ 6 has. Civ 6 has better diplomacy, so if you're a big fan of how the diplomacy works in Civ 6, you won't get that experience with Humankind. But I want to talk about these things more in another video that's not my tier list. So, but just as a general overview, I think people who find Civ 5, Civ 6 enjoyable, Age of Wonders as well. If you like the combat in Age of Wonders, there is quite a lot of similarities with the Humankind combat, with the sort of real time sort of strategy. Well, it's more like turn-based strategy, but yeah, it's more like turn-based like unit strategy that you get from Humankind is kind of like how Age of Wonders does their stuff, so you will find some similarities there, and hopefully you find that enjoyable. I think the city building is a lot more in depth in Humankind than it is in Age of Wonders, so you might find that more appealing as well. There you go. Overall, it's a big plus from me. I would recommend it to all of you. Anyway, that will be it for the Ancient Era tier list. Most of the tier list will probably take a couple hours because I've got a lot to talk about, and I think a lot of people haven't had this sort of in-depth discussion about the civilizations and cultures, how they add up to each other in Humankind. I know I could probably make these really brief, but the game isn't out yet, so I think having as much information about it as possible is really useful for people to maybe for the I doubt the devs will watch this, but if the devs do watch this, maybe it'll be useful to hear someone else's opinion, someone who played a lot of the game. But for people that are thinking about buying it, like this will give you an impression about how the game plays and how its developments come along. I think its developments come a long way, and if you played in the open dev, then maybe you're just looking for some tips to improve or a different perspective on how the game is played, then maybe that'll be helpful as well. So yeah, that's why I'm doing these tier lists. Also because a lot of people are doing them on Reddit, and I think I was posting my high scores on the Humankind Reddit, so I'm assuming some people on the Reddit who were interested in how I scored those sort of high scores for fame might be interested in my opinions about how the different cultures work, how they function, and my perception of them. So there you go. Thank you all for watching up to this point, if you did. If not, then, well, I hope you enjoyed whatever part of the video you did. And I will be doing a tier list for every single era, so they will be in the same playlist, so if you just click the next video, you'll get classical era. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.